Hello, Ray. I'm so glad to see you finally.
I'm in Australia now, but I was out of Australia for a long time, about 25 years teaching English in universities. Luckily, I was very involved in IELTS instruction
Mm-hmm.
when I was in Vietnam. And I saw that one of my employers sent me to become to learn how to be an IELTS examiner. And he said, but do not take the exam. So I worked out, what does the examiner really want to see or hear? And I concentrated on that. And luckily, well, as you know, some of your students have taken this with me. Bingo, they're here in Australia, they're in New
Yeah.
Zealand, they're in UK, so it works.
From your point of view, how much time should a person spend in order to prepare for IELTS exam?
Well, it does depend very much on what result the student wants. I would never suggest to anybody who didn't have at least an intermediate level of English to even think about this until they
Mm-hmm.
got to about level. It could be as little as a couple of months, but it could be a couple of years. So there's no hard and fast rule, but I have brought people from intermediate level to migration level in about 3 months. But this is concentrating heavily on only what the examiner wants, you
So
know.
there are some tricks for this exam,
Oh,
right?
there are some tricks. Now, if somebody wants to learn to speak English well, this takes quite a while. But if you're wanting to, if your student says, my only aim is to get this score on IELTS, then all I will teach this student is the strategies and the vocabulary that will be needed to get that score. He might not be able to talk about anything else,
Mm-hmm.
but he will get that score. IELTS is like an artificial exam. It's not really a language exam. It's a it's a strategy exam.
People ask, what is more important, like learning certain strategies or having a good level of English?
If I had to answer that and be really honest, I would say learning the strategies is more important than having a large vocabulary, because it's nice to have a really large vocabulary, but unfortunately, a lot of the textbooks and courses that we take teach us a lot of vocabulary that we're probably never ever going to use in real
Mm-hmm.
life. So I always tell my students we will concentrate on not the fancy vocabulary, but the vocabulary that you might use in an everyday situation to be well understood. Like, how many people, even native English speakers, would know what the word pernicious meant? They
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't. They wouldn't. But if you said nasty, okay, we all know what it means. So I always say, please concentrate when you're building your vocabulary on the simple words, not the difficult ones, because a native English speaker even is not going to understand what you're talking about. So
Yeah,
I
so
think the strategy is more important.
sounding natural is more important than using any sophisticated vocabulary.
Yes, yeah. It's good to know if you see these words what they might mean, but you're probably never going to really use them.
Are there any grammatical constructions like that might impress? Sometimes they say that we need to use inversion or relative clauses at least once. Do you
Yes,
encourage your students to use certain constructions?
I usually say KISS, keep it simple. The examiner wants to see better constructions than subject, verb, object every time. So if you can, make your sentences more complex, like linking words, signpost words, etc. Yes, by all means, you should. It is important to think about sentence inversion, particularly when you're looking at, like, I want score 7. You should be able to be a little bit gymnastic with the language. Speak.
As
Cool.
for idioms in speaking, Do you
Uh,
give them any kind of universal idioms? Because in IELTS criteria, it is written that for band 7, you need to have idioms or your language should be idiomatic.
yes, some of the more common ones like, I'm all ears, things like that. Yes, yes, learn some, but don't rely too heavily on them because remember, the examiner is only going to be seeing your work for, I don't know, 15 minutes out of your entire life. So if you've just got a couple of them thrown in there, he's going, oh, this guy knows about idioms. That's great.
Yeah.
He doesn't know that they might be the only ones you
Oh, yeah, such.
you've got to realize that the examiner is not your teacher.
Mm-hmm,
He or she only sees your work once.
mm-hmm.
And and if you're lucky and you've got subjects to talk about or write about that you know about, well, he or she never knows that you don't know anything about any other topic. You know? You can fool the examiner simply by, oh, I'm lucky because I do know about this, right? But there's so many other topics that you don't know about. A lot of my courses, there are 20 very popular topics that always come up in IELTS, and I teach my students enough vocabulary to deal with those 20 topics.
Sometimes on the internet, people publish something like golden lists for band 8 or for band 7 or for band 9. Do you believe they can really work? Like using a certain word will impress the examiner?
No, 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 because if you use them incorrectly, it's not going to work. So it's better to know simple words and use them correctly. Now, Toowoomba, it's a funny word, isn't it? And it means the place with two swamps, two lakes. And it's in the mountains. And the city is famous for a flower festival every year in September. We have a big flower festival and people come from everywhere. But this year, no, coronavirus.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my town. We are, if you look on the map of Australia, on the east coast, you will see Brisbane. That's the capital of Queensland. We are about 120 kilometres west in the mountains from Brisbane. It's cool climate, not so hot. So when everybody in Brisbane is going, oh, we're going, it's cool, it's comfortable.
And could you please tell us about the peculiarities of Australian English?
Basically, we speak the same English as UK because
Mm-hmm.
Australia was a British colony. And Australia does have some peculiarities. The accent is a little bit different to British English. And I would say what we might call the lower class people, the uneducated type people, they try to talk like that a lot. For teaching English, of course, I try to use an educated British type accent. It's well understood all over Australia. There's no particularly unusual grammar structures that we use in
Mm-hmm.
Australia, just the same as they would use in Britain. Sometimes we hear Americanisms creep into our language. Younger people tend to use them because they see them on videos, they see them on games, video games and things like that. But basically, it's British English. Things that are used only in Australia tend to relate to animals, places, and things that are, that are in Australia. For example, if I said, "Oh, you're a bit of a drongo," people would probably not understand what that meant. But a drongo is a type of a bird which is not very clever. So, he's a bit of a drongo. It means I don't think he's very intelligent. So there are some, of course, we say, if you're working very hard, for example, we might say flat out like a lizard drinking. You know, flat out means working very hard. And when
Mm-hmm.
a lizard drinks, he's very close to the ground. So flat out like a lizard drinking is like an idiom that we might use to say, I'm working really hard. But some of the students you sent to me years ago have now migrated to Australia, and so they keep in contact with me. And it's amazing how they're picking up Australian slang very, very well. I've got one lady, her name is, I won't tell you her full name because that's probably not very
Mhm.
good, but Ekaterina. She's from Moscow. She was a doctor. She migrated here. And when I talk to her sometimes now, she sounds like an Aussie, you know. Someone said, if you want to go to Asia and teach English, you can get paid for traveling. Oh, that's a good idea. So I took I already had a couple of university degrees, but I decided to take a TESOL certification. And I did that, and I was really surprised. As soon as it was finished, they said, "Oh, we've got a job for you in China, another one in Taiwan, another one in Japan." Oh, really? You know? And so I decided to go to Taiwan, but I stopped over in Vietnam for a 3-day stopover on the way, and I didn't leave for 25 years.
Wow.
And and I like this idea about this TESOL thing. So I spoke to the authorities in Australia about it and said, can I bring this TESOL certification to Vietnam? And they said, yes, who will instruct it? And I said, if you teach me, I will instruct it. So I became the national TESOL instructor for Vietnam. From there, they sent me to places like Malaysia and Singapore and whatever. And then I started thinking, wow, this is great. I realized that teaching people who didn't speak English was giving them an opportunity for a better life. And that quite inspired me, you know. And I thought, isn't that nice that I could make money by helping other people to improve their lot in life? And that became very satisfying. And
You also have experience preparing for TOEFL, and sometimes people
yeah,
just need any kind of exam, and they ask which one is easier, TOEFL or
yeah.
IELTS.
To be quite honest, I would always say IELTS is easier because IELTS is a very well structured exam, and to prepare for it, it's very easy if you know exactly what the examiner wants and we know the format. For example, if we're going to do the reading or the listening, for example, let's have a look at the listening. We know when the questions, they're always going to be in the order in
Mhm.
which we hear the thing. But TOEFL, not necessarily. So it can be rather confusing. So I always think that at least IELTS is well organized and it's easier to follow. It doesn't mean that you'll get a better score in it, but it is easier to, you know.
Uh,
And I have had experience doing TOEFL, and to be quite honest, it's in my opinion, I always suggest to people, why don't you take IELTS? It's easier, it's more organized, and wherever TOEFL is accepted, IELTS is accepted as an alternative. Usually, Russian students are quite, they're easy to talk to. They're keen. They're interested in a good result. Russian students are very knowledgeable about the world, so it's easy to talk to them about uh, conversation topics that challenge them. Asians often not. They would just say, "Oh, we don't have that custom in our country, so I'm not going to talk about it." No, not a good idea. What if the examiner asks me a question and I don't know anything about the topic? What should I say? Should I just say I don't know anything about it and just be quiet? I say no, 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 no. You should say, oh, I really don't know anything about that. However, I imagine it must be like this. You know,
mhm.
even if what you imagine is completely wrong, the examiner is not examining your knowledge of world affairs. He's examining your ability to talk about what you think this thing is. Examiner is going to listen to how you express what you're going
Mhm.
to say in English, not are you correct or not. No, that doesn't matter. And there's no right or wrong opinions. So concentrate on your English, even if you know nothing about it. Talk about it.
Yeah. Could you please tell me about your hobbies? Just for,
My hobby.
yeah, you've already mentioned that you were interested and you were a professional photographer.
Yes, yes. Yes, I don't do that much anymore because, wow, we don't need to be a professional anymore to take
Yeah.
fabulous photographs. You know, we can take pretty damn good ones. The other hobby I have always been, since I was about 14, a professional musician. And I still do that. I play in rock and roll bands. Can you believe it? Look, no
Well.
hair, but
Mhm.
hey, hair doesn't make you a good guitarist. And so I'm also teaching my little boy, 11 years old. I'm teaching him to play guitar. He doesn't like it. You know, my fingers hurt and he's lazy. But I keep telling him, you never know. One day when you really have no money, this could save your life. Because when I was young, I worked for 15 years as a rock and roll musician, no other job. So it's possible, but with coronavirus, it's hard. Those are my hobbies. And I do get quite a thrill out of teaching students. That gives me a bit of a buzz, you know, makes me feel very happy to think that they've achieved something. I've helped them achieve it. And it's something of a hobby. I think after being a teacher for so many years, we get to know that at this level we need to cover this and then that and then that
Mhm.
and then that. I follow that sort of thing, depending on the level and what sort of subject people are taking. And of course, with, say, for example, business English, the first thing to do is to find out what the client or the student needs and how soon he or she needs it. You know, it could be that, oh, I'm getting a new job in a new office, and it's they export motor cars from Russia to Mongolia, right? Okay, so I will start looking for things that might help this person about automotive industry, etc., and build the course around what she needs or he needs. He might want to know about how do I talk on the telephone to English clients. What are some of the things that I could become embarrassed by doing the wrong thing talking to English speakers, stuff like that. It depends entirely on what the client needs. As for general English, there's a fairly well trodden path, if you know what I mean, to go from beginner to
Mhm.
lower intermediate to upper intermediate to lower advanced and things like that. And they generally cover each step, generally covers pretty much the same topics, but handles them in a different way, a more complex way as we go along. So that's how I use my planning. Um, Nearly all of my lessons I present by slides on PowerPoint and screen share. Now, this has got a lot of advantages simply because I don't forget what to do next. And secondly, the student can see a picture of what we're talking about, and it makes a lot more sense to him or her. You know, if we're going to be talking about extinction of animals from one age to the next, and I say, oh, you know, well, the woolly mammoth became extinct in about the Pleistocene time. Boom, and then there's a picture of a mammoth, a big hairy elephant. Oh, I know what you're talking about. What did you call that again, teacher? Right, you know, and then because I use Zoom, I record every lesson and I send a link to the recording, to the video, to the student to review what we have seen. This has been very popular. Students really like that because if they miss something during the lesson or
Mhm.
they forget it, play it again. You know, they can play it as many times as they like. There's no charge for that, you know, because hey, I put it on YouTube. YouTube is free. Maybe it won't be always. So anything that needs to be written or things like that, I generally send as an exercise. And when we get together, I say, how did you do with the homework exercise? Some people say I didn't do it. Okay. Um,
What is your attitude to correcting mistakes? If a student makes a mistake in speaking, what do you usually do?
it depends at what level he or she is. A beginner, of course, we would not make as many corrections as we would somebody who was at intermediate level. So, for example, if he's getting really excited about the topic and he uses the wrong preposition at the beginning of the sentence, it's going to demotivate him if
Mm-hmm.
we say, if we correct too much. So long as the meaning of what the student is trying to say is clear, then we sometimes allow it to go past. We might later say near the end of the lesson, say, okay, and we make little notes. While we were talking about blah, 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 you said, him said, blah, blah, blah. We don't use him there. We use him like as the object.
Mm-hmm.
We would say, he said, blah, blah, blah. Oh, so you see this sentence I write here now, blah, blah, blah. Can you repeat that for me? Right. He said, yeah, that's it. You got it. But if we correct too heavily at the beginning, the student was, oh, it's all too hard. Of course, when we get up to to higher levels, of course, we expect that by then they're going to know some of these very basic things. Well, of course, exam preparation is a very different thing to general English.
Mm-hmm.
So in exam preparation, yes, I always tell my students, if you're going to take lessons with me with exam preparation, when you make a clanger, a bad mistake, I am going to correct you. I don't want you to be offended. You've got to get it right because the examiner will notice it, you know. And while it might be a small mistake, the examiner might say, oh, yeah, that's nothing. I'll let it go. If you keep making the same mistake, it's your score that's at risk here. So yes, I will correct you in that. And if a person's at like a higher level, of course we will correct almost everything, even up to pronunciation. No, if the pronunciation is still very understandable, no, we won't. But sometimes, for example, progress. The word progress, you know, uh, is a noun. Progress, but progress is a verb.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this guy was using it the wrong way around. And so I corrected him about it, and he said, oh, so there, even though it's the same word, it's different pronunciation. I said, yes, isn't English crazy? It's really crazy. So yeah, so correcting students depends very much on what the student needs, what the student expects. If he's going for an IELTS exam or a TOEFL exam, it's absolutely important that he or she needs some correction if they make particularly glaring mistakes. But in general English, not so much, because how many native English speakers do you know who speak English perfectly? None. I know none. So they make a lot, they make a lot of mistakes. They make a lot of grammar mistakes. They make a lot of pronunciation mistakes.
And can you give us a hint, at least, like to have an idea what kind of strategies can help to prepare for IELTS? What kind of secrets do you share with your students?
Oh, okay. Yes. Everybody could discover them. So I don't mind telling you. IELTS comes in 4 sections, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
Right? About the speaking first.
Yeah.
Now, the 3 parts of the speaking. Part 2 is where it is the difficult one. This is where everybody freaks out, right? So there's you have 1 minute to prepare the topic to talk about and 2 minutes to speak about it. Well, one of the first things that students get to find out is the card says, you have to read the card,
Mm-hmm.
and it tells you exactly what to talk about, right? It says, maybe talk about a famous person from your country's history. And then it'll say, tell us where this person lived, why was he famous, and it'll list the things. The important thing is in the planning stage, and this is a trick. It's not a trick, but you must then take your pencil and your paper when the examiner says you can prepare now and look at the card and say, I've got to talk about, first of all, I have to introduce the topic, right? Then the next thing, point number 2, who is this person, right? Number 3, what else is asked on the card all the way through. So if there's 4 things asked on the card, you have to address 6 things. The opening statement,
Mm-hmm.
the 4 things that are on the card, and the closing statement. Otherwise, the examiner doesn't know you're finished. So I get my students to practice this a lot. You know, oh, and the scanner says, okay, you can begin speaking now. And I always say, have a look at your notes. The examiner expects you to be prompted by your notes. He doesn't think you're cheating, right? He
Mm-hmm.
knows you've made a plan. And so you will say, the first thing you will say is, oh, I want to talk about a very interesting person in my country's history. He was known as Peter the Great because he was the Tsar of my country. A Tsar means like a king. This is what he did. He did, right, blah, blah, blah. And at the end, nearly 2 minutes, thank you for listening to my story about Tsar Peter. We find him a very interesting person. The examiner knows it's finished. And you got to practice this 2-minute thing, under 2 minutes is okay if it's like 1 minute, 50 seconds. But, 40 seconds, no, it's not enough. Over 2 minutes is okay, but not 2.5 minutes. 2 minutes and 10 seconds is okay. And it's amazing with a little practice how easy it is to get to talk for 2 minutes, right? And I show my students how to make this mind map thing, how to add bits and pieces that you might want to talk about. And that's one of the strategies for the speaking. Of course, there's part 1, which is of the speaking, which is about, hi, how are you? And how did you get here today? And, la-di-da talk. This other means sit down, make yourself comfortable. We haven't really started yet, but I'm paying attention to what you're saying. And the third part is generally a psychological or a philosophical question about the subject you've been talking about. It might be, yes, I've been talking about Tsar Peter, right? So the next question might be about, so how do you feel the Russian people were able to adjust their thinking from a Soviet system to an open market? And this is like, oh, what do people think? So it's very psychological question, not about things. So you have to be able to talk about abstract things. So we learn stuff. And because there's only certain topics that are going to be asked in IELTS, only 20 topics they ever ask in this. There's only 20. You need to have a vocabulary, and my lessons build that vocabulary for them. And I say, here is a list, the golden lists, like you said. Here is a list of words to describe people. Remember, good things and bad things about people. The examiner is only going to hear you for 2 minutes, so you only need to know 2 or 3 of these words.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
don't need
Yeah, you don't
1,000.
need 20 or 30 for
No.
that.
And then when it comes to listening, the first thing I tell people is, okay, listening for IELTS exam is all about predicting what you're likely to hear. Do not, like in the reading even, don't read the passage first. Read the questions first, right? And then, if you're reading the questions, even if it's the listening, you're going to know, they're going to talk about this thing, and it's going to be in this order. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one strategy. That's one strategy about that, and it's the same for the reading. It's exactly the same. But of course, in the reading, we have to talk about skimming and scanning, right? Scanning, and I say scanning is easy. You just look at the whole paper and you look at the headings, or if there's any pictures on it, you're lucky. So what's it all about? Oh, it's all about that. In less than a minute, you should know that. And then you look at the questions. Don't try to read the whole damn thing, you haven't got time. Look at the questions, and you know the questions are in the same order as what's written. So once you've answered question one, you can, and you've got it there out of the reading, you know you can move to the next part. And you just tick, then you look along the line, right down the middle for words that are either mentioned in the question or might mean the same. And your answer is going to be somewhere near that word, right? Look around, get the answer, tick the most appropriate answer. And a lot of students come out of the reading and we say, how did you do in the reading? They say, oh, I answered every question. Excellent. What was the reading about? They say, I have no idea. Yet they still scored very well, right? Because they followed the strategy, you know, and it does work. And then, of course, the speaking, well, this is the one that everyone's scared about. And they generally score the worst in that. But when they know how to make the mind map and move from one part to the next, to the next, to the next, and sum it up, there's no problem. Writing.
I think that
Discursive
writing is
essays.
the most difficult for Russians. Like I do remember the
Yes,
statistics every year. Writing is
yeah,
the worst for Russian candidates.
right, right. Well, there's a way to handle the most common essays. Um, for example, you know, part one, of course, is all about a diagram, and all you do is write about what you can see. That's not very
You're
difficult.
speaking about academic
But
IELTS, right?
yeah, yes, of course, of course. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the other one about writing a letter, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, anyone can do that. All you need is reasonable English. But the other part two, there is a formula for doing this very, very well. And the formula works like this. It's the same for a speech, a presentation, or writing a discursive essay. Tell the reader what you're going to tell him. Tell him what you want to tell him. Tell him what you just told him. And you should use 5 paragraphs. Right. First paragraph, you restate the question using your own words and say what your opinion is about this. Next one, agree with it and give reasons or authority why you think this is probably the right option. Next, concede that there's probably another opinion that has validity and say
Mm-hmm.
why it might have validity. So, no, the killer paragraph number 4. Why my opinion is correct. Number 5, this is what I just told you about, but this is my opinion again. So the paragraph number 4 is the one that, strangely enough, gets the big score. Examiners say, wow, this person really is thinking, because he's got 1,000 essays with 4
Yeah.
paragraphs. Suddenly he gets one with 5. He knows it's different. He's paying attention. And when he said why my opinion is the correct one, wow, that just bumps. I've seen this bump a score almost an entire band by putting that in there. So not always, but it does sometimes. But yeah,
Thank you
it's
so
been
much.
interesting to talk
Yeah.
to you.
And
Okay.
yeah, we are so lucky to have you among our teachers. And I
Oh,
hope, yeah, thank you so much.
well,
It was a
I'm
real
very,
pleasure.
I'm very happy to be working with you too. So
Thanks.
I will say now, I have to go too. So I will say, das svardanya spasibo. Okay. Do I say it correctly?
Yeah, exactly. Thanks.
So see you later. Okay.
Thank
Thank you. See
Bye.
you soon. Well done.
Thanks.
Okay. Bye for now.
Bye.